presentation.
Just give me a minute.
So now we would be like to start the webinar, which is scheduled to run for about 1.5 hours. The wind assessment study suggests that India has a massive potential for about 302 gigawatts of wind power, out of which 70 gigawatt lies in the coast of Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. Recently, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy has set medium and long-term targets for the offshore wind, 5 gigawatt by 2022 and 30 gigawatt by 2030. We have gathered to understand Tamil Nadu's position for adopting offshore wind. 2 days back, General Electric also announced an enormous size of offshore wind turbine. The webinar provides the insights into how to embrace new technologies and confront the hurdles in developing projects in these new markets. Can you go to the agenda, please? Yeah, thank you. The agenda is spread to discuss some of these important questions and solutions. We will start the webinar with the opening remark by Jennifer Fagan, the first Secretary, Trade and Investment, Department of International Trade, British High Commission, followed by Dr. Rajesh Katiyal's presentation on the offshore wind energy development, particularly in Tamil Nadu. Then we will have a panel discussion scheduled for about 40 minutes, moderated by Dr. Praveen Das, Scientist D, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, followed by the question and answer and the closing remark by Bharat Jayaraj, Executive Director, Energy Program, WRI. So let's get started with the webinar. We all know that UK has the world's largest offshore wind capacity. And with the upcoming COP26 going to be held in UK, the eyes are set on UK for their leadership in decarbonization. I will request Jennifer to begin her presentation, begin her opening remarks. Jennifer.
Hi, everyone. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much to the WRI for inviting me to give the opening address today. It's a pleasure to be here and I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So my name is Jennifer Fagan and I am the first Secretary for Trade and Investment, and Energy and Clean Growth is a key area of focus for me in my role. So I'm going to use this time to touch on three things. Firstly, the UK and India's impressive steps that they're taking to combat climate change. Secondly, touch on UK capabilities in offshore wind. And then thirdly, talk about how we're already working together in the sector and hopefully where we can expand further. So firstly, a short word on climate change in COP26. As you all know, climate change is a worldwide problem and we're at a crossroads. Either we will succeed and avert the most ravaging effects of climate change, or we will fail and look on as more and more of our planet becomes hostile to human life. It is a topic that is important to everyone, no matter where in the world they live. Government, businesses, and consumers must work together to tackle this crisis. India's size, geography, and importance puts it at the centre of the global climate story. The progress you have made, quadrupling wind and solar capacity in the last decade, has been truly astonishing. Prime Minister Modi's 450 gigawatt target for new solar and wind is an example to the world. The step into offshore wind is an exciting opportunity to further boost India's renewable energy capacity and hopefully help India reduce its reliance on coal. The UK is among international leaders on climate change. We were the first major economy in the world to commit in law to end our contribution to global warming. And next year, as you said, we will be hosting the COP26 UN Climate Change Conference. We're working hard to make it a moment when the world demonstrates ambitious action to keep the Paris progress on track and unites behind a clean and sustainable recovery from COVID. It is an opportunity to make a truly global effort. COP26 will be the biggest summit the UK has ever hosted, bringing together over 30,000 delegates when it takes place in Glasgow next year. And collaboration between the UK and India will be crucial to its success. The High Commission will be running a sequence of events over the year. Specifically for South India, we will be holding a South India Energy Conclave to focus on opportunities for emissions reduction, including a discussion on offshore wind and wider renewable energy. We really hope to see you all there. Now on to renewable energy specifically, and again, I will boast and say the UK is a global leader, with our renewables share of electricity generation increasing to 47% in Q1 of 2020, a record high. This year, we have had our longest ever run of coal-free electricity generation since the Industrial Revolution, a 2-month streak of coal-free power from April to June. Offshore wind is a leading factor in this success. We have the largest offshore wind array in the world at 36% of global capacity. And in August this year, wind generated the highest ever share of Britain's electricity needs, with turbines producing almost 60% of power at one point. And on to how the UK and India are already working together on offshore wind. As I see it, the UK and India's shared commitment to climate action and a transition to clean energy makes us natural partners in the quest for increased capacity for offshore wind. We're already doing a lot together in terms of direct investments, research and innovation, and technical assistance. For example, we are working closely with NIWE and MNRE on the research and innovation front and exploring partnerships to collaborate on developing technology that will cater to the Indian offshore wind sector. Our technical assistance programme aims to further strengthen our collaboration with India on offshore wind and energy storage. And we continue to support the Green Leadership Alliance through networks and financial resources to increase the number of Indian companies using significantly larger volumes of clean energy. There is massive potential for UK expertise to help the renewable sector grow here in India. I believe our unique experience can help you realise your plans to ramp up manufacturing for the solar, storage and wind industries. The offshore wind sector is crucial and essential for India in order to meet its Paris commitments. But it will also bring jobs and prosperity to India, as well as being essential in meeting India's ever-growing energy demand, helping to bring people out of energy poverty and providing energy security for India, which is why I'm delighted to be speaking on such an important topic today, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the session. I will leave it there and let the experts speak, but thank you for having me open this session, and I really look forward to the rest of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was quite insightful, and we look forward for the India-UK commitments on the offshore wind. So I'll move next to our eminent speaker from National Institute of Wind Energy. Dr. Katyal is a well-known face in the wind energy sector, and he need no introduction, detailed introduction on that. He has been working in this field for past 30 years. Today, Dr. Katyal will be providing you with an introduction to the emerging offshore wind technology development, particularly in Tamil Nadu. That will set the context for our panel discussion. I'll request Dr. Katyal to please start his presentation.
Thank you. In fact, whatever Dr. Katyal has shown in his slides, same or I can say more work has been done on Gujarat coast. But our initial thought was key because the state government was very conducive. The conditions of state government of Gujarat was very conducive, and we thought to start with Gujarat. But now some constraints are there from financing side, and we have to rework on the whole issue. And we thought that Tamil Nadu can be the better option because of its high wind speed, and so that we can expect the kind of tariff which Indian market is always thriving for. And I'm also very happy to have this kind of very learned panelists, so that we can have answers to our intriguing questions which are very important for the development of this sector. So if I may start with Mr. Alok Kumar, and to give his initial thought on the whole development, and specifically to answer on the level of preparedness from a point of view of what is the kind of infrastructure is required and where we are, and in the terms of grid also where we are, and if we want to have that energy transition for offshore wind, what are the pros and cons on that, And what are the principal engineering and financial challenges which differentiate offshore from the onshore, as well as other renewable sources? And how to achieve a cost reduction, what we are expecting for Indian market. And the third question will be, what are the wind forecasting techniques, and how LIDAR or similar technology will be helpful for forecasting models for India?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dr. Pravidas. So I will start with the first one. First, I would like to give a overview of the work that has been done in Gujarat and Tamil Nadu. And DNBGL was lucky to be associated with some of the early projects. So the first project was in 2013 in Gujarat. And the second most comprehensive project was European Union funded and GWEC-led consortium that did that, which is FOWIN project, and which laid most of the foundation for Gujarat and Tamil Nadu studies. So the work started in 2013, and when it was started in 2013, the most of the questions that we got from many stakeholders was like, why offshore? So one of the biggest change I see that now we are discussing about how to do it, how to make it possible. So that somehow, the question around why is more or less settled, and we are more discussing about how to do it. As you rightly pointed out, Gujarat had been slightly ahead in terms of studies. We have LIDAR there, which was put up in towards the end of 2017 under FOWIN projects. And then some geotechnical and geophysical studies have also been done. However, I would say that in terms of wind resource, Tamil Nadu is better than Gujarat. If I take the example of Dhanushkodi Met Mast, at 100-meter height, it's coming around 8.66 meter per second, which could go up to almost 9 meter per second when we take into account 120 meter. Whereas for Gujarat, it's around 7.62 meter per second at 120 meter high. So that is, making a huge difference in terms of overall financing. However, having said that, I would also say that, when you are trying to establish offshore market, which is very, very capital intensive, it's not about technology, it's about a whole lot of things, political will and other things also, like stakeholder engagement, having everyone on the board. At the same time, a long-term assurance on the policy. So that will make it possible. So therefore, while there is a clear-cut I would say, wind resource advantage for Tamil Nadu, but at the same time, we need to have all other important factors to be conducive to have the first offshore wind. So there were too many questions from your side. So if I miss anything, do let me know. So now regarding the preparedness, I would say that when the FOWIN work started, we had some of the sporadic studies, but we didn't have a very comprehensive studies or the offshore based, I would say measure data. So that now we have, and we have the hard number to talk about. We also know which are the areas which are no-go, which are the areas where we can go. We have the zones in terms of priorities, So all those roadmaps are in place now. And where we are still lacking, for example, the relevant ports in both the states have been identified under FOWIN studies, but still you would require to make it fully prepared, as Dr. Katyal also mentioned with respect to the Tuticorin port. And there are a few more ports which have been identified in both the states. And then when you are going for the project level, you require, some more study related to geotechnical for each of the location for the foundations. So what I would say that, we are just one step behind projects, and all the projects related studies still need to be done to have a bankable report. Coming to your last question about the measurement and the accuracy, what we have seen that the LIDAR-based measurement have been bankable on case-to-case basis. I would say that the number of cases have been going up. However, they need to be sort of correlated or verified through an onshore met mast. And it's always a kind of a balance between the amount of money that we spend for offshore met mast as well as the accuracy level. So as Dr. Katyal also mentioned that, when he's trying to put up a LiDAR in Tamil Nadu, they will also try to map it or verify with the Dhanushkori Met mast. Similarly, the LiDAR, which is there in Gujarat, that is being verified by the Met mast, 120-meter Met mast put up at Jafrabad. So this is what one has to do so that we can have confidence, and then we can have the bankability regarding the LiDAR data. So Dr. Das, if I missed any questions, I'm happy to.
Can you just give little more on the cost reduction factors? Actually, what would be the cost reduction drivers for offshore wind in India?
Right. Yeah. So see, I mean, when we talk about the cost reduction, it has to go through a certain trajectory. Whenever you are going to start the first project, it is going to be expensive, because you don't have the local ecosystem, and most of the technology and know-how will come from outside, which could be expensive. There will be also a learning, a learning curve for everyone, or So what I mean to say that there will be a transient phase. You will be starting with a higher cost, which will be much more expensive than what you see in onshore. And then, the more question is that without making, much mistake, and how fast we can have the local ecosystem stabilized, and we can reach the stabilized and optimized cost for everything. If you look for both onshore and offshore, cost matrix is completely different. For example, foundation cost for onshore could be around 4% to 5%, whereas this could be more than 3 times for offshore, the whole support structure. Same goes with the electrical infrastructure. Somewhere for onshore, it will be around 9 to 10%, whereas it could be around 2.5 times when we take for offshore. So what would drive, I would say that, a long-term stable policy that will start, that will give a signal that government is serious. There is a roadmap. Studies have been done, because as I mentioned, it's a very, very capital intensive. So all the players will start investing and looking for that. Second thing is that, some kind of knowledge sharing or capacity building is required, because we have many local industry who can actually get into the offshore wind with the support of European companies. For example, we have maritime-based industry. They can get into the jacket or other foundational structure. We also have quite a huge experience coming in from oil and gas like ONGC. And also we have some of the company like EIL or L&T. They have done a lot of offshore related work, but still offshore wind will be new. So it also depends how fast we can do the capacity building, so that they can move to this sector, and that will also help in building the local ecosystem and bringing down the cost. So if I have to prioritize, number one is the long-term stable policy with a roadmap from government. Second would be the capacity building, so that some of the local companies for who it will be very easy to move to the offshore wind, they should be actually moving to this, and that will try to build a local ecosystem here. And third is, of course, the studies which are required to be done before, we can think about the project and some of the project financing of the offshore wind. So it's mostly about the de-risking of the project.
If I may, ask you one more question. In your point of view, what should be the ideal size for India to go for its first projects?
Yeah, so that's that's quite a long, I would say, topic, because in last 5-6 years, in fact, I would say 7 years, we have debated a lot that should we have demonstration projects, should we have a couple of turbines. And so first of all, there are both pros and cons. If you want to put up a few turbines, so installation and all the costs will be very, very high. So what you would be demonstrating is the technology and the capability to do that, but you will not get a fair idea that what would be the cost for future, because as I mentioned, you will not have the economy of a scale, and you will not have any fair idea about that. So the point that goes against this is that the technologies are well matured, understood in Europe. So that is not something for us to demonstrate. We are more grappling with the cost, that what kind of cost India can expect, or how fast it can stabilize, or where it could go. So this is where points have been against demonstration project. But both have their own pros and cons. So as I mentioned that, some kind of a optimization can be done where, you know, the cost can come down, because, and that was, I believe, was the main idea for going for 1,000 megawatt or choosing this size by MNRE when they floated the expression of interest, so that there is certain level of economy of a scale. However, it will still be expensive. Any, you know, the first, you know, the project is going to be expensive. So the way I see it, like a series of events, like you will start with 1,000 megawatt, and then you should also have visibility for next one and then subsequent one. And then with every phase, you'll be looking at, you know, a certain reduction in the price as the local ecosystem stabilizes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alok. Then our next panelist, Mr. Omar Variaba, please give your initial comments on the development of offshore wind in India, and if specifically you can give some comments on how efficient are today's wind turbines are, and how India can leapfrog from the wind energy technologies. And the second question will be, how can India attract the OEM for offshore to streamline and strengthen the transmission network and the supply chain? Because we know, okay, turbine manufacturing, a good manufacturing base exists, but the in context to offshore, the transmission and the other supply chains are important. So how we can do that?
Sure. Good afternoon, good evening to all of you, and thanks to WRI for conducting this very interesting session on offshore wind. Coming back to you, Dr. Dash, I would like to tell you that before I actually come to offshore wind, let me just summarize about the onshore wind. So as you know, in India, the first onshore turbine was installed in the year 1986, and that was somewhere around 45 kW turbine with a 30-meter hub height. And now, if you see, after 3 decades in India, so the onshore wind is now has gone multifold in both in terms of the hub height and the rotor diameter. So I must say that the today's technologies is tomorrow's commodity. And today we see in India we have a 2 megawatt platform turbine, 3.5 megawatt platform turbines are also coming. But having said that, the wind industry in India has seen a sea change in the last couple of years, especially because of the transformation from the feed-in tariff system to the auction process. And we have witnessed that just coming out with the ambitious target or a series of auctions alone is not sufficient. There are a lot of challenges, and there are a lot of the key activities that we need to take care of at the time of execution. And that's the reason why we are seeing that out of the SECI 9 tranches of SECI and around 14 gigawatt of auction volume concluded, only 2 or 3 gigawatt has actually come on the ground. And there are certain reasons for that. And these reasons are very important to understand before we actually go to the offshore wind. Now, when I talk about offshore, I can only say this much, that for offshore, sky is the limit. And, as Dr. Katyal rightly put in the government study in place, and, Mr. Alok Verma also rightly put in the, his perspective about the policy is the key here. Long-term sustainable policy is the key here. From the OEM standpoint, I would put it in this way that, see, technology is available. You were asking me about technology, Dr. Dash. Technology is available. In fact, in 2018, the Vestas MHI has announced the first wind turbine, which has a double digit of the rated output power, around 10 megawatt or so. So this is the kind of a technology available. It's just a matter of how we can optimize these machines for Indian conditions, especially in Gujarat as well as in the Tamil Nadu coastline. And if you see the basic difference between onshore and offshore is that in onshore, around 70% is the cost of turbine, 30% is the cost of the infrastructure, BOP and the land and transmission. In offshore, it is actually the other way around. The 30% is the cost of turbine and 70% is the cost of the rest of the other, the surrounding activity. So here, I think, it's a very complex project development process, and we need, the utmost level of, I would say, the extremely dedicated and strong collaborative efforts, among diverse and complex work stream, which involves government, which involves the financial institutions, which involves IPP, OEMs, developers, marine experts, and even within the government, if I say in onshore, if we are talking about only Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Commerce, here there are more than 12 ministries involved. And the biggest challenge in onshore that we are witnessing is the federal as well as the state government. There's too much of I would say we need some strong interface between these two governments. And when we are talking about 12 ministries involved, definitely that kind of interface has to be very strong. Now, coming back to OEM and the technology, if I said that, in last, 10 years or so, we have seen a tremendous change in the technology. Machines are becoming more powerful, innovations are happening, technology advancements are happening. And as a result, the COE, LCOE is going down. In fact, in offshore wind, we have seen the significant drop in the LCOE in last, the decade or so. It is around in the range of around, the 66% decline we have seen even since 2014. And today the offshore wind LCOE stands at somewhere around $78 per megawatt hour on a global average basis. So that means, the things are improving and things are not stopping here. It will further improve. However, the major challenges still remain in terms of adopting to offshore wind is that NEWA is doing their job in terms of collecting information, collecting data, wind assessment, and so on and so forth. But how about the port development strategy? How about the, because I visited one port in Denmark, that port was SBI port. And that's a pretty large port. It's a dedicated port only for the offshore activity in the country. And the port has around 15 years back, around 10,000 the fishing boats were there. Today, if you go and visit the port, you find none of the boats there. The entire port has been now dedicated to only offshore wind. The port is around 3.5 million square meter in area, and around 10 kilometer of the quays, and the alongside the depth of around 4.5 meter this is a kind of dimension. But this port has one speciality that I've witnessed, and probably we also need to think about it. And that is that, they have given the land on a lease basis to different OEMs and the developers, where they do pre-assembly, where they do, the stacking of the blades, or they use as a, warehouse. There were several vessels there where loading, uploading of the component happens. And then probably, the port was also only dedicated for the offshore related activity. Dr. Katyal has shown the port picture, and I can see that port has a good, but at least not sufficient if we have an ambitious target of 30 gigawatt kind of a thing in next one decade. At the same time, if I talk about the technology, so today for onshore wind, for 2 megawatt platform, I'm using the blade. We are manufacturing blade in Ahmedabad, in Gujarat. The length of the blade is around 64 meter. And believe me, I have a hard time to in terms of logistics, to transfer the blade from Gujarat to even Tamil Nadu through road. Imagine for if I put a V164 turbine, which is for 10 megawatt, the blade length is around 90 meter or so, 80 to 90 meter. Which road in India will allow me to do a smooth logistic of the blade in the country? So there are a lot of the challenges on that part also. So we also need to think about the OEM establishing their manufacturing unit near the port, where the easy movement of the blades and the tower and the nacelle and hub could be possible through seaway. So those kind of things are equally important. And again, we need a policy. We need a very strong, clear-cut guiding principle policy for offshore wind and the strategy. If our target is not small, our target is not only 1 gigawatt or so, we are talking about 30 gigawatt. And as you see, the gestation period is pretty large. It's a capital intensive activity. And how many OEMs today in India who are capable enough, both in terms of production as well as the the financial muscle power to do this activity. So in order to attract more players in India, we need a strong policy backup. We need a long-term strategy, and of course, we need a support from government to demonstrate that yes, the 70% activity which is in the court of government, they will have to start developing year after year to develop the confidence in the international community, international investors. Then only they will come and invest in the country. Otherwise, believe me, importing the blades, importing the turbine, and then commissioning here in the country for offshore will not going to make any economic sense. We are very cost conscious, people here in the country. Even for onshore wind, the tariff goes from 2.7 rupees to 3 rupees. We raise eyebrows here. And here we are talking about the double digit of a tariff structure. We need to think about the financial institutions. The cost of finance is very high in the country. We don't have the model what the Europe has, the Denmark has, like the pension fund or any other insurance, the instruments are there. So these kind of, the factors are equally important. So when on the one side, Dr. Katyal is doing a lot of, data acquisition kind of activity, but at the same time, other ministries, other stakeholders also need to, jack up their activities year on year to showcase to the international players so that the trust can be established, and then they will better come forward here, start thinking about investing in the country in terms of manufacturing unit, in terms of a technology innovation, R&D, and so on and so forth. Then only probably we can see a strong, robust, the thought process for the 30 gigawatt kind of a target. I hope I answered the question. If you still want some more detail, feel free to ask me.
I understood your point, and if I understood correctly, what you say is technology is available and people are ready, it can be done. But if you can just give what kind of timelines are required, if suppose, as you say, technology is available, but Indian specific technology would need some kind of customization. So to develop a domestic supply chain here, and what kind of timeline is required for that? So which can be, part of our strategy.
I think the technology, timeline, and the cost reduction, that same question that you asked to Mr. Alok Kumar also, see, all these things are related. Okay, you cannot see them in tandem. Okay, what I can see is that even for onshore wind today, the total volume manufacturing capacity of putting all OEM together is around 10,000 megawatt, 10 gigawatt. But the commissioning is happening year on year for last 3 years is around 2 gigawatt or 2,000 megawatt. Now, for such a low volume, it is extremely difficult to convince the global OEMs or the suppliers to come and invest in India. So we have to in order to attract them, what anybody will see in the boardroom of individual company in their headquarters is that how strong is their policy, how strong is their willingness to deploy this kind of a volume, and of course whether they are handholding the new players in the country, what kind of ease of doing business India is offering for the new player or already established player. Is there any import export rules which are more conducive and not cumbersome? Is there any local content requirement there, or there's a there's a lot of forcefully they are enforcing such things. So international player look into such activity, and believe me, if the volume comes, definitely the more and more player will come automatically in the country. You don't have to invite them. They will see India as a strategic market for the investment for offshore wind, and they will automatically come. Once they come, then the cost will be amortized on the large volume, and probably the overall cost structure will come down. Again, the same thing is there for the development of the technology. As I said, technology is available in Europe, in US. We just need to adopt that technology and optimize that as per Gujarat wind condition or a Tamil Nadu wind condition in the offshore context. But then, in order to attract these players, to invite them in the country, country has to offer a very, very strong fundamental strategic intent and the policy backup. Otherwise, people will be just looking at. I'll just give you one example. India and Taiwan, they started probably at the same time. In fact, India started little late about the offshore talk, but today, the Taiwan is going way faster, way ahead than India. A lot of OEMs who were planning to come and invest in India, a lot of developers who were planning to see India, they actually did a lot of survey for more than 6 months in the country, and finally they decided to sit on the fence and they started investing in Taiwan. So this is how we are seeing why it is happening. There is something which is not going as per the order or as per the pre-decided strategy. So we need to correct that particular thing and try to create a conducive environment so that the technology as well as the manufacturing thing will start coming in the country.
So much, Amar sir. And then I will go to the next panelist, Ms. Liming Chiao. Please give your initial comments, and my specific questions will be: what are the general dynamics of procurement and development in Taiwan offshore wind? and looking from the design, function, and necessity of policies and how they fit into the business case of offshore projects learning for India. And the second question will be, what are the initial challenges in Taiwan for commercialization of offshore wind?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Dash. And it's my pleasure to join this panel. And I think a lot of the speakers prior to me has already touched the point. I think the success of Taiwan really relies on the government's policy, which is the key actually at this stage for India's offshore policy to really like kick off. And the several success that I think the Taiwan government really did is, number one, that they had a really clear and really strong kind of government support and very strong signal on developing the offshore wind in the very beginning. And concretely, this translates into a very big and ambitious target, which started at 5.5 gigawatt by 2025, and now increased to an additional 10 gigawatt between 2025 to 2036. And backed, this target is also backed by a very kind of good feed-in tariff in the initial phase. And the FIT that the government were giving in the for the first 3 gigawatt projects that are like under the FIT scheme were actually quite good the first years when those FIT were given, and this really gives the whole industry a very strong signal and a very kind of strong attraction to really make their investment decision and really to move to Taiwan. And that's why we see a lot of like international developers really see Taiwan as like an Asia hub and set up their Asia kind of headquarters there, like Ørsted, WPD, and Northland Power, Macquarie, a number of them. Really, they are the key offshore players. And apart from that, I think another panelist also mentioned that like the demonstration phase is also important. I think in Taiwan, when these development really happened, it only happened like 2 years ago. But the whole discussion and the demonstration phase actually started, I think, back around 2012-13. When the government first set up like 2 or 3 like 2 demonstration turbines outside Formosa area, and that was the initial really testing the water kind of actions in this direction. And other than that, I think a strong target FIT to really back the initial phase of development. And the third thing that I think Taiwan also did quite good is that after they captured that volume, like the first initial 3.8 gigawatt, which is backed by a very good FIT, then they very quickly started to move this into like an auction scheme, where the companies have a very strong kind of like assurance on the future kind of how the pipeline, how the supply chain will be deployed, and also assurance on the cost reduction in the future, which is why like a year ago, that in the auction we have already seen that their products, the cost reduction has already been achieved, like in the auction that done like last year, which is like the year after 1 year after they started this whole process. Yeah. So I mean, that is also another way to answer some of the questions about cost reduction. Cost reduction can happen, but this is very much backed by the confidence of the investor and the confidence of the industry. And this confidence of investor and the industry comes from the initial like feed-in tariff that is high enough or strong enough to give the long-term kind of return for the investor, and also a very clear and strong target for the future. Yeah, so that's kind of my key point to echo some of the discussions that has been bouncing around, and also kind of my reaction to the questions from Dr. Dash.
To just add to my previous question, actually, if you know, in India, we already have the options for renewables only from solar or onshore wind, which is much cheaper. And what is the scenario in Taiwan? Like, what is this tariff of offshore in Taiwan right now, how it compares to the onshore or other RE technology which is available in Taiwan? Can I just quantify on those parts?
You can't really draw a comparison like Taiwan onshore versus offshore market and India onshore versus offshore market, because the market size is completely different. Because like India is like global, like I think number 5 or like.
We are number 4. We are number 4 on onshore.
Wind installation country, and like number 2 in Asia. And this is not the same scale of development for Taiwan for the onshore. And I think another thing is that for Taiwan, it's the prospect for like developing further onshore project is also very much limited because of the land availability, and also like in the center of the Taiwan, the island, it's mainly the mountains, and that also limited the possibility of really develop the onshore wind projects in Taiwan. Which is also why like the government is like made the decision to go offshore. It is, I think it is, when we look back, I think it is a bold and very ambitious kind of decision, and also a political decision, I think. But when we look at what has happened today, I think that's a really like a right decision to make, and really has made Taiwan the kind of the case or the leader of Asia. Also because of this kind of ambition, or this kind of like resolution that the government really put forward, I think that also attract all these international kind of very dynamic international investors into Taiwan. And I mean, lots of people are also talking about like China's market size and the China's like offshore wind market size. But I think the other thing is that Taiwan being like a much smaller size of market, but the openness of that market is much better than that of China. So that offers a lot of like a wider range of like companies to really play a role there. And yeah, I hope that answers the question. Maybe I diverted a bit. Yeah,
that's okay. What is the average power purchase cost of Taiwan right now?
Now they are on the feed-in tariff. I think it. You mean the FIT for the offshore for the?
No. I am asking in general. If you consider the entire energy basket, what is the average power purchase cost for Taiwan, national level?
The feed-in tariff for the offshore is 18 cents. The level the cost of energy. The electricity cost. Alistair, do you know that, or I don't know. I probably have to check it out.
So not the average electricity cost, but the latest tender there came down to $85 per megawatt hour, and that's still on the journey to a lot lower. So you could well expect it to get to 50, 60. But they have, as Liming says, a different scenario to that you have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Liming. And then next go to our next panelist, Mr. Alistair. And please give your initial comments on the whole development aspects of offshore wind in India. And if I may ask you the specific questions, what are the biggest challenges to establish an offshore wind market in India? And second, what challenges do you foresee in supply chain and logistics? And how can India leverage its domestic strength in wind sector to cater to offshore requirements? And how much dependence will be there in foreign companies?
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for the opportunity to join you on this. And I'll build on some of the things that have been said from Dr. Katyal. totally agree, Tamil Nadu is the place to be, and you've done some great work there. One topic that has only been touched on is it's great to have offshore wind with its high capacity factors, better quality of electricity than other renewable energy sources. But the studies we've been doing recently in other countries is the economic benefits are of similar scale. So Taiwan has been mentioned, and Alok, you said a long-term believable target, stable, that was the word you used. So I'd put some numbers to that. It needs to be 15 years ahead, and ideally even longer than that. And by all means have a vision and a nearer term target. That seems to be the way a lot of people are going. And if that's a small vision, then to build on Amar's point, the industry won't, in the supply chain, will remain international. So that needs to be an ambitious target. And India has the scale to do that. Much larger numbers than Taiwan can do. And then the simple economics will be that the investment will come to India. That will give the greater benefit to not just the government, but to the people that you need to bring on board as stakeholders as well. And one dynamic that we haven't mentioned is that in larger countries, it's often the provincial government that drives the attraction of investment, because they get the jobs as well, and jobs means votes, sort of thing. But nevertheless, the federal government needs to put the overall target in place and the regulations that would allow projects to come through. So I think Tamil Nadu government has a key role to play in this, and certainly from previous conversations, they seem to be keen. Then, yes, first scale projects, when we speak with the industry, we're hearing numbers of 100 to 300 megawatts, big enough to be commercially of interest, because it's not just the technology. We've got to prove the consenting process, the stakeholder engagement I touched on, all the things which are practical in building a project. We know the resources there, that bit's lovely. There is conversation at the moment with World Bank, who I'm also lead consultant to their offshore wind program, because that long-term vision needs to have, touching on Alok's comment, it needs to have sort of an understanding of how all the pieces in this complex sector need to move. And we've heard mention of ports and grid infrastructure, but there's a lot more to it as well. So I'm looking forward to being part of that study in the next few months that will look at all those factors. And as an example, I would look at the one that we've just completed for Vietnam, which was published on Wednesday, which gives you a very complete picture of what is possible for Vietnam. And the Taiwan example, yes, their long-term vision has been wholly material to where they are. In fact, I remember when I worked at the Crown Estate in the UK, managing the offshore wind program, they came to us about 8 years ago, and I gave them copies of the leasing documents, which they have adopted in Taiwan, and funnily enough, the same in the US. So those would be sort of some of the opening comments. But in terms of the challenges is to explain how the greater capacity factors and other factors I mentioned all complement the onshore and PV. So this isn't to me, this isn't an either or. This is an additional national resource to the benefit of India and its people. That will need some careful articulation. So in the work that I've been doing in so many countries, fine, we have good experience in offshore wind, but you have to adapt it to the political, fiscal, and cultural backdrop of each country. So there's no one simple answer. It's how you craft it to work in each country as we go forward. The supply chain issue goes back, I'm sorry, every time to policy. If the policy is big enough and brave enough, then the supply chain will resolve, if you like, and you will see partnerships between international players and local players. They want to. They know the value of working with people in the country. The domestic strengths, yes. So the sorts of things that you would see is that certain things are easier to make in country. So the monopiles, fabrication of jacket structures, blades. So I'm told that the blades in an offshore wind project, it's about 1/3 of the man hours in the whole project. So you would want to make that local. And then some other components would still naturally be brought in certain parts like cables. You know, those are very specialist items, especially the export cables, but I'm confident that India has some capability there as well. And then the international players are itching to come to India. Their expressions of interest 2 years ago, they really do want to assist to help grow the sector as part of a global rollout. So India, it has a role in that, clearly, as it has with onshore wind. Does that answer your question, Dr. Dash?
Let me go to the last panelist, Mr. Krishna. Please give your initial comments, and if you can answer my questions. The first question would be, with the recent developments in wind turbine technology, what are the recent technical innovations in terms of foundation and blade technology in the UK that can help India? And my second question would be, what is the innovative approach and development in grid infrastructure in states like Tamil Nadu and Gujarat, which have high offshore wind potential, bringing learning from the UK?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to join us. It's my honor to join these distinguished panelists, and we've had some really interesting ideas so far. So let me give you a few thoughts from the UK side. The first thing I would say, just to reinforce a point that's been made a number of times, is the point on scale, to use the American phrase, go big or go home. And I think it absolutely applies to offshore wind. You've seen the reduction in the cost of energy that's really been driven by the fact that offshore wind has got bigger and bigger. And also the other point I just wanted to reinforce at the start, and absolutely agree with from Amar and from Alistair, on the fact that India has the demand, the world's second largest economy, and that really puts you in a great place to really build scale and an exciting place for innovation. So we've heard about the fiscal and policy drivers, but thinking about innovation and technology innovation in the UK, I'll start with Capex. On the Capex side, as has been mentioned already, the turbines and foundations of a typical offshore wind farm account for about 60% of that Capex cost. So that's really where the attention needs to start from an innovation perspective. We've heard from Amar from investors on one of the leading turbine OEMs in the world, that turbines are getting bigger and bigger. The main design criteria in turbines is fatigue loading. You've got these turbines spinning for at least 90% of their life. And that's one of the biggest limiting factors. We're also seeing, as new geographies open up in the likes of Japan and South Korea, and potentially India as well, where you've got cyclone weather systems coming through, the need to actually design for extreme loads. With all of those things in the mix, we're seeing a innovation in terms of the type of materials that are being used and the construction techniques of the blades themselves. But also, just to put it out there and maybe forecast a bit further, because the great thing about innovation is obviously we can think about the next 10 to 20 years. And I was having a really interesting conversation with Siemens recently, who were saying that actually the curve, if you look at the curve of turbine size, having a nice linear progression upwards, that's going to tail off, and we're going to get to an ultimate limit. Actually, as blades get longer and longer, by design, you're going to get deflection at the tip of the blades, which will eventually start impacting the tower. And so there's already innovative thinking happening now around actually how do we go even bigger than that? Potentially we need a downwind wind turbine where the blades sit behind the tower and you have an air efficient tower. So lots of interesting innovation happening in that space. To quickly move to the second area of foundations, which account for a significant proportion of that Capex cost as well. It's a really interesting space because I think that is where there is huge opportunity to make cost savings at a local level. So the turbine OEM industry is very much a global level, and you'll be competing from country to country for essentially the same turbines. But actually the foundation levels are much more local and very dependent on your site conditions. So it's really interesting to hear about the geotechnical work that is happening now. And I think that is where you have the chance in India to really drive the cost down. In the UK, we've seen some really ambitious technology. You would have heard of Dogger Bank, which will be the largest wind farm in the world. For the Met mast system on Dogger Bank, they used a very innovative suction bucket technology. So actually the Met masts were towed out to site by a tugboat and installed essentially just with a tugboat. So it'd be great to show you a picture of this, but essentially the fact that you can call the foundations out and the foundations essentially sink and install themselves in the ground. Actually, that design wasn't used for the turbines themselves, as the turbines will start going in to Dogger Bank. They're sticking to the standard monopile arrangement, but they've learned a lot through that process. And the reason I mention it is that the vessel installation cost is huge in chartering vessels, and so there's lots of thinking going about how to reduce that. The other thing to mention in the innovation space and the foundation space is obviously floating. So at the moment, floating is attractive for large water depths, and we see the likes of Japan and South Korea really driving the floating industry and the early stages of that. There's lots of concepts out there in floating. There's about 60 concepts, about 12 pilots in the water to date. And the thinking right now is that actually it only makes sense if you've got at least 60 meters of water. But there is some very innovative thinking that actually if you don't have to install into the sea bed, you can actually really get some efficiencies on the marshalling side of turbines. So that's a space to watch. And then the other thing on innovation to mention is actually going bigger. It is in terms of the actual wind farm size. I'm just conscious of time as well, so I will dive into and give you 2 seconds on the grid side as well. The grid side is really interesting because you're integrating new power into an old grid, and that causes huge amounts of issues. And really, there's 3 options to strengthen grids. The most exciting is the digital side, and actually through forecasting of your demand and supply, trying to marry that up together. And I know India is fantastically placed to drive that digital revolution in managing the power grid. But there's 2 very practical methods as well. The first one is interconnection. So in the UK, we are constantly building interconnectors. Even with Brexit approaching in less than 90 days, we're building interconnectors into Europe and into Denmark most recently to really strengthen our grid at a wider level. And the last very practical method is storage. So we see the likes of Australia, who have a very weak linear grid, looking to storage as their option. Biggest battery installed in the world in Australia on an onshore wind farm there. And I'll leave you with one of the areas where we are hearing news all the time, which is the hydrogen economy. And potentially, given your downstream footprint and your industrial footprint in India, you've got a huge opportunity to tap into that hydrogen market and potentially use offshore wind to essentially store energy in the form of hydrogen and sell that to the international market. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Great to join you.
Thank you so much, Tristan. I will just summarize very quickly. if I got correctly, the main driver will be a stable policy and a committed roadmap. That will be the key for India's, success in offshore. And of course, for a cost reduction, I think innovation is the answer. So we have to think in innovative ways in terms of technology as well as strategy or the methodology of developing these projects, so that we can have at least a project on ground. Then I think things will pick up, and the commercial project will automatically get developed, and the international players, financiers, they will take interest on the market. So to go for our first project in your ministry, I will just give a quick information here. Ministry is right now trying to make the roadmap. What we thought initially, based on the expression of interest, we could not able to get the financial support from finance ministry. Rather, we have been told to look into the project from different financing methods. So now we are working on alternate financing mechanisms, wherein we are told to have a roadmap, and that roadmap should show okay, this financial support from government is required for how much capacity of project and up to what point of time. So these two big questions require answers, for which we can get that roadmap finalized and take our actions appropriately. So with that, I will leave it to Ms. Kajal.
Thank you so much, Dr. Das. Thanks to all our panelists. Special thanks to Ulster, because I know how tight your schedule was and still you were able to make time for this. And to our moderator as well for summarizing this. And to all other panelists for coming down for this. I'm sure like 1.5 is still not sufficient for this, although we tried to stretch it, but maybe next time we'll try to make best out of this and move into the next level of it. It was a power-filled panel discussion bringing out some interesting solutions and for pushing the offshore wind. We have some excellent questions coming in, but due to the time constraints, we will not be able to take. But as I mentioned earlier, we will be compiling all these questions and be sharing with all the participants. Thank you with this, and I now hand over to Bharat Jairaj for his closing remarks. Thank you.
Thank you all. This has been a terrific set of presentations and conversations. So thanks for staying on and sharing these very, very important thoughts. I think we've heard many interesting ideas, including, I think, critically an overview of where the technology stands with respect, not just to India, but overall globally, and then where we can look at India in it, and then within India, where we can look at states like Gujarat and Tamil Nadu in that. We've got into some level of depth in terms of trying to understand what the potential projects might look like and what the kinds of issues might come up in terms of challenges, and particularly the issues on logistics, on OEM, things that we usually pick up quite later on. I think it's important for us to spend some time on it in the design. And I really enjoyed the piece on innovation and trying to find the sort of best fit for India, and sort of trying to bring a bottom up to what is otherwise this sort of technology that has developed primarily for other markets. I want to sort of just pick on 2 points that I think came up. I won't repeat what said about the stable policy and the need for us to think about local capacity building and so on. I think that's a very, very important part of how we have to think through this issue of how will we help bring the costs down. Yes, performance is improving, technology is improving, but costs, if they have to come down, it has to be built and woven into a sort of long-term vision with enough understanding of the issues and risks faced by different parts of that puzzle. So I think it's a very important point, and I'm grateful that all the speakers sort of alluded to it. The other point which I wanted to highlight was the importance of talking about evacuation, transmission, distribution upfront, and not waiting again for these to happen much later. And I was very happy to see the efforts that are going on parallelly, because we did have, even in the same state in Tamil Nadu, we had a huge amount of onshore wind that had been set up, but could not be evacuated because we hadn't at that point planned for the transmission systems at the appropriate time. So I think getting this right is important. And I did want to sort of make one last point, which I think didn't receive much attention, the issue of also using this opportunity to better understand the environmental impacts that are likely to happen. Now, this is, of course, well studied in different parts of the world, and we've already heard how shipping lanes, port-related issues, those will tend to get studied. But it is also important for us to get this done right. There are issues with respect to soil and habitats, food chains, and so on, as well as release of contaminants from seabed, whole host of issues that again, it's not the point of trying to do this from a regulatory perspective as much as the point of trying to look at how do we make sure this is a net benefit to everyone in society. So I think as we think and sort of going back to where we started with where Jennifer Fagan sort of put this in the broader context of climate change and our global responsibilities, I think thinking through what these might look like, not just for the investors and the private sector, but also thinking through around consumers and the broader environment. I think that is really how we can construct a clean energy transition that works for all. So with that, let me thank you all for spending this Friday with us, morning, afternoon, evening, and specifically to the speakers, the panelists, the moderator. All of you were terrific, and it was really an important conversation for us to have, and we're glad to have hosted this. With this, and thank you also to all the participants who've joined on this Friday. I really don't have anything more to say. We have 10 more minutes of your time. So thank you all, and good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks.
Everyone, have a nice weekend.